Shalom, brethren. All be seated from singing our last hymn. Today's message is titled Redeem the Time. And to redeem time means to use it wisely and purposefully, making the most of every opportunity that we have. And the concept comes from Ephesians 5:16, which urges believers to redeem the time because the days are evil. And this phrase implies several key principles. The first principle is making the most of every moment. Redeeming time involves recognizing that each moment is valuable and should be used effectively. Instead of letting time pass by idly or squandering it on trivial matters, we're called to invest that time in activities that have lasting significance and align with our values and goals. And it means living with purpose and intentionality. To redeem time is to live deliberately. And this means setting clear priorities, making intentional choices, and focusing on what truly matters. It's about understanding that our time on earth is limited and using it in ways that reflect our deepest values and God's purposes for our lives. It's aligning with God's will. Redeeming time involves aligning our activities with God's will. This includes spending time in prayer, pursuing spiritual growth, serving others, and engaging in work that honors Him. And by seeking His guidance and aligning our actions with His purposes, we ensure that our time is used in ways that contribute to His kingdom. It's also about recognizing the urgency of time. So this concept also highlights the urgency of making wise use of our time. You see, life is fleeting, and we are encouraged to act now rather than delay important tasks or decisions. By recognizing the brevity of life, we are motivated to make the most of time and have the time that we have and to avoid procrastination. And it's about embracing the present. Redeeming time involves embracing the present moment rather than dwelling on the past or worrying about the future. It's about being fully present and engaged in the here and now, ensuring that our actions reflect our values and contribute to a meaningful life. And it's about seeking redemption and restoration. For many, redeeming time also involves reflecting on past misuses of time and seeking redemption. It's about acknowledging past mistakes or missed opportunities and making changes in life, changes to live more effectively moving forward. And this can involve forgiveness, setting new goals, or making amends wherever needed. So in essence, brethren, to redeem time is to recognize its value, to live with purpose, and ensure that our actions reflect our highest priorities and God's intentions for us. It's a call to make the most of every moment, understanding that how we use our time has a significant impact on our lives and the lives of others. And this time management is not just a practical skill, but it's also a spiritual discipline. And we'll get more into that. And today's message is a little bit different than the messages we normally present. This one has a lot of anecdotal stories to provide examples of lessons or ways that we can go about redeeming the time. So let's look at the scriptural basis for this concept of redeeming the time. If you turn over to Ephesians 15 through 16, in the modern King James Version, it says, "See then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil." And then over in Colossians 4:5, it says, "Walk in wisdom toward those on the outside, redeeming the time." In Genesis 1:14 through 19, it says, "And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, and let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day. You see, God created time. Time is a creation of our Father in heaven. There was an elderly man once showed his grandson a magnificent grandfather clock that had been in their family for generations. The clock, with all of its intricate mechanisms, was a masterpiece, ticking away steadily, marking each second, minute, and hour. The grandfather explained that the clock was a reminder of God's creation of time. Just as the clock was designed to measure time, so God set the sun, moon, and stars to govern the day and night. The clock, though man-made, could only measure time, but it was God who created it. The grandfather then shared how when he was young, he didn't appreciate the significance of time. He wasted many hours on trivial pursuits, not realizing that time was a precious gift from God. And it wasn't until he faced a serious illness later in life that he truly understood the value of each of those moments. And as he recovered, he made a commitment to live every day intentionally, honoring the God who created time and gave him the days of his life. And this serves as a reminder that time is not just a random occurrence, but a deliberate creation of God. And it's up to us to cherish and make the most of it. Turn over to Ecclesiastes chapter 3. We'll read verses 1 through 8. It says, "For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill, and a time to heal, a time to break down, and a time to build up, a time to weep, and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek, and a time to lose, a time to keep, and a time to cast away, a time to tear, and a time to sow, a time to keep silence, and a time to speak, a time to love, and a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace." God has sovereignty over time. There was a farmer that lived in a small village, tending his land with care and devotion. He understood the rhythms of the earth, the time to plant and the time to harvest, the time to water and the time to let the fields rest. One year, however, there came an unexpected drought that hit the region, and many of the villagers were anxious, fearing that their crops would fail. But this farmer just remained calm and continued his work. And when asked why he wasn't worried, the farmer replied, "I've been farming for many years, and I've learned that the seasons are in God's hands. There are times of abundance and times of scarcity, but God is in control of it all. My job is to be faithful with the time and the resources He's given me." And as the drought persisted, the farmer prayed and trusted in God's timing. And miraculously, a late season rain arrived just in time to save the crops. The villagers marveled at how the farmer's trust in God's sovereignty over time was rewarded. You see, God's timing is perfect, even when circumstances seem dire. Just as the farmer trusted in God's control over the seasons, we too must trust that God is sovereign over the times and seasons of our lives. Let's turn over to Psalms chapter 90. Psalms 90 verse 4 says, "For 1,000 years in your sight are but as yesterday when it is past, or as a watch in the night." You see, God exists outside of time. It has no impact on Him whatsoever. And He sees our lives laid out in a timeline, and He already knows how the story ends. as it says in Isaiah chapter 46, verses 8 through 11. It says, "Remember this and stand firm. Recall it to mind, you transgressors. Remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will accomplish all my purpose. Calling a bird of prey from the east, and a man of my counsel from a far country. I have spoken, and I will bring it to pass. I have purposed, and I will do it." You see, God knows the end from the beginning. As I said, he sees our life like a storyline, a visual, and he sees all the events that for him, it's almost like it's in the past, even though it's in the present for us. Let's look at James chapter 4, verses 13 through 17. It says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance, and all such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin." You see, this human life is just a blip, a very short span of time in the grand scheme. There was an old man sitting on his porch, reflecting on his life. He had lived a full life with many achievements, but as he looked back, he realized how quickly time had passed. And that's the odd thing, isn't it? As we get older, the time that has passed seems like it went in a moment, even though time just seems to keep dragging on in the present. It's very odd. And for this old man, it seemed like only yesterday that he was a young boy playing in the fields, then a teenager full of dreams, then a young man starting a family. And now in his twilight years, he felt as though life had passed him by in the blink of an eye. And I'm sure many of us can relate. He remembered a conversation he had with his father when he was a young man. His father had told him, life is like a vapor. One moment it's here and the next it's gone. Don't waste it, son. Make every day count. At the time, the young man didn't fully understand his father's words. But now, as he sat in the quiet of the evening, he realized their truth. The old man wished he had spent more time on the things that truly mattered, loving his family, serving others, and seeking God. He whispered a prayer, asking God to help him make the most of the time that he had left. And though his days were now few, he resolved to live them with purpose, cherishing each moment as a gift from God. You see, this shows us the brevity of life and the importance of living each day with intentionality. It serves as a poignant reminder that time is fleeting and, we must use it wisely. Let's turn over to Psalms 90. We'll read 9 through 12, where it says, "For all our days pass away under your wrath. We bring our years to an end like a sigh. The years of our life are 70, or even by reason of strength 80. Yet their span is but toil and trouble. They are soon gone, and we fly away. Who considers the power of your anger and your wrath according to the fear of you? So teach us to number our days, that we may get a heart of wisdom." And then over in Proverbs 16:9, it says, "The heart of man plans his way, but Yehovah establishes his steps." And this is a call to wisdom in the use of our time. A successful businessman, once known for his tireless work ethic, he spent long hours at the office, often at the expense of his health and relationships. He believed that time was money, and every minute not spent working was a minute wasted. And his ambition drove him to achieve great success. But it also left him feeling empty and disconnected from those he loved. One day, the businessman's life took an unexpected turn. He suffered a heart attack and was rushed to the hospital. And as he lay in the hospital bed, he had plenty of time to think. He realized that he had been so focused on making money that he had neglected the more important aspects of life: his family, his health, and his relationship with God. During his recovery, the businessman began to reassess his priorities. He sought wisdom in the use of his time, not just for financial gain, but for the things that truly mattered. He started spending more time with his family, nurturing his spiritual life, and helping others. And he discovered that the true fulfillment came not from accumulating wealth, but from living wisely and purposefully. And this man's example teaches us that wisdom is in the use of time is crucial. It's not enough to be busy, but we must be wise in how we use our time, focusing on what truly matters in the light of eternity. Let's turn over to Matthew 28. We'll read verses 18 through 20. It says, "And Jesus came and said to them, 'All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age.'" You see, there is a spiritual significance in this redemption of time. There was a young woman named Emily who grew up in a Christian home, attending church every Sabbath. However, as she grew older, she became more focused on her career and social life, drifting away from her faith. She always thought she could recommit herself to God later, when she was older and had more time. One day, Emily received devastating news. A close friend from college had passed away unexpectedly in a car accident. And this news shook her to the very core. She realized that her friend, who had never shown much interest in faith, might have passed away without ever knowing the one true God and his Son, Jesus the Christ. And the weight of that thought was just overwhelming for Emily. And she remembered the many times that she had felt prompted to share her faith with her friend, but had put it off, thinking there would always be another opportunity. Now, those opportunities were gone forever. And this tragic event served as a wake-up call for Emily. She recommitted her life, living the life that God expects us to live by following his law. She made a vow to never delay sharing the good news of the gospel with others, not just in the example of her life, but also in sharing the good news in conversation. We don't know how much time we or others have, and it's crucial to redeem the time by sharing the good news of Jesus the Christ whenever we have the chance. That's our calling. Let's look at 2 Corinthians 6, verse 2. It says, "For he says, 'In a favorable time I listened to you, and in a day of salvation I've helped you. Behold, now is the favorable time. Behold, now is the day of salvation.'" Let's turn over to Proverbs chapter 6, verses 6 through 11. It says, "Go to the ant, O sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief, officer, or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man." You see, we have to battle against procrastination and idleness. And as I was preparing this message, I could see that it was actually written for me. I'm a terrible procrastinator. Now, Tom was a bright and ambitious college student, but he had a bad habit of procrastinating. He always told himself that he worked best under pressure. So he would put off assignments and projects until the last minute. And while this approach worked for him in high school, it really became a problem in college where the workload was much heavier. And one semester, Tom was assigned a major research paper that counted for a significant portion of his grade. And as usual, he delayed starting it, thinking he had plenty of time. However, as the deadline approached, he found himself overwhelmed with other assignments and responsibilities. He stayed up all night trying to complete the paper, but ended up submitting it late and poorly done. Obviously, Tom's grades suffered, and he realized too late that his procrastination had cost him not just a good grade, but also the respect of his professor. And he regretted the time that he had wasted on trivial activities when he could have been working on the paper. And after this experience, Tom made a commitment to change his ways. Excuse me. He learned the hard way that procrastination leads to missed opportunities and unnecessary stress. He started managing his time better, prioritizing his tasks, and working on assignments as soon as they were given. Tom's story illustrates the dangers of procrastination and idleness. When we delay important tasks, we not only risk missing out on opportunities, but we also dishonor the time God has given us. Redeeming the time means acting when it's needed, not waiting until it's too late. Turn over to Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verse 4, where we read, "He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap." You have to act when it's time to act. Let's look at 2 Corinthians 4. We'll read in verse 18. It says, "As we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal." This is a story about Michael, who was a minister, and he had dedicated his life to serving in remote villages in Africa. And the work was extremely challenging, and the needs of the ministry there, the people there, were overwhelming. And many of his friends and family back home, they really didn't understand why he chose to live in such difficult conditions when he could have had a comfortable life in the United States. One day, after several years of ministry, Michael was feeling particularly discouraged. The challenges of the work there were wearing him down, and he wondered if he was really making any difference. And he prayed, asking God for encouragement. And later that week, a local woman whom Michael had been serving came to visit him. And the woman was carrying a small baby who had been born prematurely. And the woman tearfully told Michael that without his help and the prayers of the church, her baby would not have survived. Now, she thanked Michael for bringing the message of hope and salvation to the village, explaining that many lives had been changed because of his work. And it was in that moment that Michael was reminded of the eternal perspective he needed to maintain. He realized that his work, though difficult, was making an eternal impact on the lives of those he served. The temporary hardships he faced were nothing compared to the joy of seeing their lives transformed. You see, brethren, when we focus on the things of this world, we can become discouraged by the difficulties we face. When you sit down and you watch the news, you get depressed. When you look around, you see all of the human suffering. It's depressing. But when we keep our eyes on the kingdom, we understand that the time we spend serving God is never wasted. If we're doing the things of God and focusing on His way, our time is never wasted. Turn over to Colossians chapter 3. We'll read verses 2 through 6. It says, "Set your minds on the things above, not on the things that are on the earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. Put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you: sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. On account of these, the wrath of God is coming." We have to make every moment count for God's kingdom. Turn over to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Verse 58, it says, "Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable." This reminds me of the story that we just read in Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, how they were immovable. "Throw us in the furnace if you like, but we are not going to bow down, Nebuchadnezzar, to that golden image that you created." They were immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. Mrs. Thompson was a widow in her late 70s who lived alone in a small town. She wasn't wealthy, and she wasn't able to do much physically, but she had a heart full of love for God and a desire to serve Him in whatever way she could. Every day she spent hours in prayer, lifting up the needs of her brethren in her community and servants of God around the world. She also made it a point to write encouraging letters to people who were going through difficult times. Over the years, she had written hundreds of letters, many of which had been kept and cherished by those who received them. And though Mrs. Thompson's contributions were quiet and behind the scenes, they had a profound impact on the lives of others. One day, a young woman from her church came to visit Mrs. Thompson. The young woman was going through a tough time and had received one of Mrs. Thompson's letters. She told Mrs. Thompson how much the letter had meant to her, how it had come at just the right moment and had given her the strength to keep going. Mrs. Thompson smiled and said, "I may not have much to offer, but I've learned that God can use even the smallest things when we offer them to Him. I want to make every moment count for His kingdom." Sometimes it's about the small, faithful acts of service that make a big difference in the lives of others. Every moment we have can be used for God's glory if we're willing to offer it to Him. Let's look at Galatians 6, 9 through 10, where it says, "And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. So then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially to those who are of the household of faith." Let's turn over to Mark chapter 1, verse 35. It says, "And rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed." See, we have to prioritize time with God. Spending time with our Father in heaven has to be priority one. John was a successful CEO of a large corporation. His days were filled with meetings, travel, and endless responsibilities. And despite his busy schedule, John was known for his calm demeanor and wise decision-making. When asked how he managed to stay grounded, he revealed his secret. He says every morning, before the chaos of the day began, he spent an hour in prayer and reading scripture. John shared how years ago he had neglected his spiritual life in favor of building his career. He would rush out the door each morning, driving straight into his work without giving a thought to his relationship with God. But as the pressures of his job mounted, he found himself overwhelmed and anxious. It was then that an older mentor advised him to start his day with God. And reluctantly, John agreed to try it. And much to his surprise, he found that dedicating the first hour of his day to prayer and Bible study gave him a sense of peace and clarity that carried him through the day. And he began to prioritize his time with God above all else. And it transformed not just his work life, but his entire perspective on what truly mattered. And this highlights the importance of prioritizing time with God. No matter how busy life gets, making time for prayer and scripture sets a foundation for everything else we do, right? It puts our mind in the right frame, points us in the right direction, and it allows us to redeem our time in a way that honors God. Let's look at Psalm 63, verse 1, where it says, a psalm of David, when he was in the wilderness of Judah. "O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water." And we have to remember that David was a man after God's own heart. He had exceptional character. He committed a lot of sin, but it says that he fervently repented and he dedicated time to spend with his Father in heaven. Over in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verses 13 through 14, we're all familiar with this one, says, "The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil." That's all that matters, is that we're right with God and we are following his ways, doing what he says, right? We're not to let the cares of this world overrule seeking the kingdom. And this reminds me of the story of Daniel, when the high officials of the Medo-Persian Empire under King Darius pushed the king to sign a proclamation that anyone caught praying to any god other than King Darius would be put to death. And what was Daniel's response? Very similar to his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that we read about over in Daniel chapter 6, verse 10. It says, when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in the upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as he had done previously. And this is the character. You're going to tell me I can't pray to God? What am I going to do? I'm not only going to pray to God, I'm going to do it 3 times a day, and I'm going to do it right in front of everybody. And this brings to mind another story. Sarah was a dedicated athlete who competed in long-distance running. And to maintain her competitive edge, she followed a very strict training regimen, waking up at 5 a.m. every day to run, even in the harshest weather. And over the years, her discipline paid off as she won numerous races and accolades. However, her greatest victory didn't come on the track. It came when she applied the same discipline to her spiritual life. After realizing that her relationship with God was growing stagnant, she decided to incorporate spiritual practices into her daily routine, just as she did with her training. And Sarah started with small steps, setting aside time each morning for Bible reading and prayer, memorizing scripture during her runs, and practicing gratitude throughout the day. And practicing gratitude is a big part of staying right with God. See, when we forget to practice gratitude, it breeds arrogance and confidence in self rather than confidence in God. When we're thankful to our Father in heaven for what we have and recognize from whence it comes, then that breeds humility and will bring blessing in the end. So over time, these habits became second nature for Sarah, strengthening her faith and drawing her closer to God. She realized that just as her physical fitness required regular disciplined effort, so did her spiritual fitness. By establishing godly routines, Sarah found that she was better equipped to face life's challenges and to serve others with a joyful heart. Just as discipline is essential in athletics, it's also crucial in our spiritual lives. And consistent spiritual practices help us grow in our faith and redeem the time in ways, again, that glorify God. And remember what Paul said. He said, I beat myself into submission every day. And he says to run the race to win so that we don't lose our crown. Over at 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15. It says, do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, rightly handling the word of truth. See, we have to use that time that God has given us for spiritual growth. There was a man named Mark who was serving a long prison sentence for crimes he committed in his youth. And when he first arrived at prison, he was bitter and angry, feeling that his life was over. But everything changed when he met a fellow inmate who introduced him to the Bible. With nothing but time on his hands, Mark began to read the Bible out of sheer boredom. However, as he read, something in his heart began to change. The words of Scripture spoke to him in ways he had never expected, and he started to see his life in a new light. And over the years, Mark used his time in prison to grow spiritually. He read through the entire Bible multiple times, participated in Bible study, and he began living the laws and statutes of God. He lived as an example to the other inmates, and by the time he was released, Mark was a completely different person. He had not only grown in his faith, but had also found a sense of purpose and direction for his life. After his release, Mark dedicated his life to helping others who were in the same position he once was. He often shared how in a place where time seemed to stand still, he found the opportunity to redeem it by drawing closer to God and growing spiritually. Mark's transformation shows that no matter where we are in life, we can always choose to redeem the time by seeking God and growing in our faith. Let's look at Joshua chapter 1, verse 8. It says, this book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. You see, we not only have to read it, but we have to do it, right? What did James say? He said, it's not the hearers of the law that are saved, but the doers. So we have to do what is written. It says, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. And that requires a change in your life, and that's what Mark experienced. Let's take a look at Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. It says, for everything there is a season. We read this earlier. And a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embrace. A time to seek and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to cast away. A time to tear and a time to sow. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. See, there's a time for all things, and we have to balance work, rest, and relationships. And God helps us with that by giving us the Sabbath, because he knew we needed it. There was an elder in the church named John. He was known for his tireless dedication to his congregation. He preached powerful sermons, counseled church members, and was involved in every aspect of church life. However, his relentless pace eventually took a toll on him because he became exhausted, irritable, and distant from his family. One Sabbath, after an especially busy week, John collapsed in his office before services. The doctor told him that he was suffering from severe burnout and needed to take immediate rest. Reluctantly, John took a leave of absence to recover. And during his time off, he had a lot of time to reflect on his life and ministry. He realized that he had been so focused on his work that he had neglected the importance of rest and his relationships with his family and God. He understood that while his work was important, it was not sustainable without balance. And when John returned to his ministry, he made significant changes. He delegated more responsibilities, set aside regular times for rest and family, and renewed his commitment to personal spiritual discipline. He learned that to be effective in his work, he needed to honor the God-given rhythms of work, rest, and relationship. And when we prioritize these areas, we can serve God more effectively and live healthier, more fulfilling lives. Take a look at Mark 6:31, where it says, and he said to them, come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. So we have to take time for ourselves to rest, rejuvenate, and balance, right? There's moderation in all things is a biblical principle. But this serving of others with the time that we have is very important. Let's look at Matthew 25:34 through 40, where it says, then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. You see, serving one another is pleasing in the eyes of our Father in heaven. Now, this is a story about Linda. And Linda was a nurse who worked long hours in a busy hospital. Her days were filled with tending to patients, managing paperwork, and dealing with the stress of a demanding job. And despite her hectic schedule, Linda made it a point to spend extra time with her patients, especially those who were alone or facing difficult diagnoses. And one day, Linda cared for an elderly man named Mr. Johnson, who was terminally ill. He had no family or friends who visited him, and he seemed resigned to spending his final days in solitude. Moved by his loneliness, Linda decided to spend her lunch breaks sitting with him, listening to his stories and praying with him. And as the days passed, Mr. Johnson began to open up, sharing memories from his life and expressing his fears about death. Linda's compassion and willingness to spend time with him brought him comfort in his final days. On the day that he passed, he told Linda that her kindness had restored his faith in God and that he was at peace. After Mr. Johnson's passing, Linda reflected on how the simple act of giving her time had made such a profound difference in his life. She realized that serving others with the time we have, even in small ways, can have an eternal impact. And Linda's decision to use her time to comfort a lonely patient shows that every moment we spend serving others is a way to redeem the time for God's glory. Let's turn over to Galatians 5, chapter 13, where it says, "For you were called to freedom, brothers. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, for through love, serve one another." And that's what we should be doing, not just the brethren alone, but all people. And this is how we become more like our elder brother, Jesus the Messiah, who was the perfect image or reflection of God in his character. We are to become more like that. And the more we become like that, we become more of that same image or reflection of our Father in heaven. And so it's important, right, that we avoid wasting our time. This time is too valuable to be wasting. Let's look at Proverbs chapter 12, verse 11. It says, "Whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits lacks sense." So Kevin was a young professional who loved technology. He spent hours scrolling through social media, playing video games, and binge watching TV shows. Though he excelled at his job, he often found himself procrastinating and struggling to stay focused on his personal goals. And one day Kevin realized that his evenings were slipping away without accomplishing anything meaningful. He decided to track how he spent his time and was shocked to discover how much of it was wasted on trivial activities. And determined to make a change, Kevin decided to cut back on his screen time and set specific goals for himself. And instead of spending his evenings on his phone or in front of the TV, Kevin began using that time to read, exercise, and volunteer at his church. The change was difficult at first, but over time, he noticed a significant improvement in his productivity, in his relationships, and his overall well-being. You see, Kevin's epiphany about time wasters led him to make intentional choices about how he spent his time. And by avoiding activities that drained his time without adding value, he was able to focus on what truly mattered in his life. And Kevin's decision to cut back on distractions and focus on meaningful activities is a practical example of how we can redeem the time in our own lives. What does it say in Ephesians 5, chapter 11, or chapter 5, verse 11? It says, "Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them." See, we can't get caught up in all of this useless activity that means nothing. It's a waste of time. Instead, what should we be doing? Well, Proverbs 16:3, "Commit your works to Yehovah, and your plans will be established." You see, planning and goal setting in a God-honoring way is pleasing to our Father. It brings us closer to Him. A good example of this is the Johnson family. They had a tradition every year. At the beginning of the year, they would gather around the dinner table and set goals for the coming year. But these weren't just any goals. They were goals they prayed over and sought God's guidance for. Each family member would write down their goals in different categories: spiritual growth, relationships, work or school, and service to others. Then they would discuss how these goals aligned with God's will and how they could support each other in achieving them. The family also set goals together, such as reading through the Bible in a year or volunteering as a family. So they had individual goals and they had collective goals. And throughout the year, they would revisit these goals, adjusting them as needed and celebrating the progress that they made. In this practice, it helped the Johnsons stay focused on what God wanted them to accomplish and kept them accountable to one another. It also set a good example for the children regarding making God a priority in their lives, just like it says in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6. "Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it." You see, we have to train our children to redeem that time and to use their time wisely and in a proper way. By seeking God's will in their plans, the Johnson family was able to use their time purposefully and effectively, ensuring that their goals were aligned with God's purpose for their lives. Let's turn over to James chapter 4, verses 13 through 15. It says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit, yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that." And we read this earlier, but it's applicable in this instance as well. We have to, again, show humility. It's arrogant to think that we control anything that tomorrow brings. Even as much as we prepare for it, you could save your entire life, invest your money, and have a huge retirement ready to go. And financial collapse could come and wipe you out. You don't have any control over that. You don't have any control over natural disaster, any of that. Our fate is in God's hands, and we need to treat him that way. And there are always going to be challenges to this redemption of time. Things are going to want to get in the way. Let's look at 1 Corinthians 10:31. It says, "So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God." There was a story of Tom. He had a very demanding job. His days were filled with meetings, deadlines, constant notifications from his phone. And when he came home, he often found himself glued to his devices, checking emails, scrolling through social media, or playing games. His wife and young children noticed his distracted presence, but Tom didn't realize how much his habits were affecting them. One evening, Tom's 5-year-old daughter came to him with a drawing she had made. She stood by his side, waiting for him to look up from his phone. After a few moments of being ignored, she quietly walked away, leaving the drawing on his desk. Tom found it later, and when he realized what had happened, he was struck with guilt. And so, determined to make a change, Tom decided to set boundaries with his technology use. He started by turning off notifications during family time, setting aside his phone, and being fully present with his wife and kids. It wasn't easy, and he often felt the urge to check his phone, but as he persisted, he noticed a difference in his relationship and his own sense of fulfillment. Tom's struggle with distraction highlights a common challenge in redeeming the time. In a world filled with endless distraction, it takes intentional effort to focus on what truly matters. And Tom's story serves as a reminder that overcoming distractions is crucial for making the most of our time and being present in the moments that count. Let's turn over to Matthew chapter 6, verses 33 through 34, where it says, "But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Therefore, do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble." Turn over to Joel chapter 2, verse 25. It says, "I will restore to you the years that the swarming locust has eaten, the hopper, the destroyer, and the cutter, my great army which I sent among you." And this is about dealing with regret over wasted time. Emily was a college student, had always been a procrastinator. She would put off assignments until the last minute, cramming the night before exams and rushing through projects. Her grades were decent, but she knew she wasn't reaching her full potential. And despite her best intentions, Emily struggled to break the cycle of procrastination. One semester, Emily found herself overwhelmed by a particularly challenging course. The final project was worth a large portion of her grade, but she kept delaying the work. And as the deadline approached, Emily realized she was in trouble. She stayed up all night trying to complete the project, but the lack of preparation showed in the final product. She received her worst grade of the semester, and it was a wake-up call. And now Emily decided that she needed to change her approach to time management. She began breaking down her assignments into smaller tasks, setting deadlines for each one, and holding herself accountable. She also learned to prioritize her work, focusing on what was most important instead of what was most urgent. Over time, Emily's grades improved, and she felt less stressed and more in control of her time. Emily's battle with procrastination is a challenge that many face. when trying to redeem the time. Her story illustrates the importance of discipline and planning in overcoming procrastination, allowing us to use our time more effectively and achieve our goals. Look at Philippians chapter 3, verses 13 through 14. It says, "Brothers, I do not consider that I have made it my own, but one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and straining forward to what lies ahead, I press on toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus." So we don't have to worry about what is behind. What is ahead of us is our priority. And we use what is behind as lessons, but we apply those lessons moving forward. And so it's important as forgiving others is forgiving ourselves. We have to repent and move forward, change our lives and move forward. And that's what that's really about. Look at Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. It says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Right? We have to balance these demands of life, and we can lay those demands, those burdens of life on Christ. He says he will give us rest. Lisa was an active member of her church, involved in serving the brethren in her community in many ways. She volunteered as a Sabbath school teacher, helped the youth group, organized charity events, and was always the first to sign up when help was needed. However, as the demands of her time increased, Lisa began to feel exhausted. And she was constantly busy, but her energy and enthusiasm were waning. One day, after a particularly stressful week, Lisa found herself sitting in her car after church, just really too drained and tired to move. And she realized she was on the verge of burnout. And the joy she once felt in serving had been replaced by fatigue and resentment. Lisa knew something had to change. She took a step back and began to reevaluate her commitments. And after prayer and reflection, she decided to focus on a few activities where she felt most called, rather than spreading herself too thin. And she also made time for rest, prayer, and personal spiritual growth. And slowly, Lisa regained her energy and that passion for serving, but with a healthier balance. Lisa's experience with burnout is a reminder that even good things can become overwhelming if we don't manage our time wisely. Her story shows the importance of setting boundaries and ensuring that our service to others doesn't come at the expense of our own well-being and our relationship with God. So, again, moderation in all things. Look at Luke chapter 10, verses 38 through 42. It says, "Now as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went up to him and said, 'Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me.' But the Lord answered her, 'Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her.' So Mary prioritized something other than what Martha had prioritized. She was learning at Christ's feet, and that was more important to her. So, concluding today's message, brethren, in our daily lives, it's easy to become absorbed in the immediate demands of work, family, and personal pursuits. Yet beneath the surface of our routine activities lies a profound truth. How we choose to spend our time has eternal significance. The Bible urges us to redeem the time, reminding us that our days on earth are limited, and each moment carries the potential to impact eternity. When we invest our time in deepening our relationship with God, and serving others, and pursuing what is good and true, we're not just filling our days. We are sowing seeds that can bear eternal fruit. The choices we make, the love we show, the faith we live out can influence not only our own spiritual journey, but also the lives of those around us, often in ways we may never fully see or understand. The concept of redeeming the time challenges us to live with purpose and intentionality, recognizing that every day is a gift from God and an opportunity to contribute to His kingdom. Whether through small acts of kindness, diligent work, or persistent prayer, our efforts, when aligned with God's will, have a ripple effect that extends beyond this life. In the end, redeeming the time is about aligning our lives with God's eternal perspective. It's about understanding that what we do today echoes into eternity, and that the true value of our time lies in how it's used for His glory. By living with this awareness, we can approach each day with a sense of purpose and hope, knowing that our time on earth, though brief, can have an everlasting impact. Time is one of the most precious gifts we have, yet it's easy to let it slip away in the busyness of life. And we often tell ourselves that we'll get to important things tomorrow, but tomorrow is never guaranteed. The call to redeem the time isn't just about making better use of our days. It's about recognizing that today is the day to start. Starting today to redeem the time means choosing to live with purpose right now. It's deciding to prioritize what truly matters, our relationship with God, our loved ones, and the work He's called us to do. Each day presents new opportunities to grow, to love, and to serve. Waiting for the perfect moment or a more convenient time often leads to missed opportunities and lingering regret. The beauty of starting today is that it allows us to begin making changes immediately, no matter how small. Whether it's setting aside time for prayer, reaching out to someone in need, or taking a step toward a long-deferred goal, today is the day to act. By starting now, we align ourselves with God's will and open the door for Him to work in and through us. The time we have is a gift, and each day is an opportunity to use it wisely. Let's not wait for tomorrow, but instead start today to redeem the time, trusting that God will guide our steps and bless our efforts as we seek to live for Him. And let's remember what He says over in Revelation 22:12. Behold, I am coming soon, bringing my recompense with me to repay each one for what he has done. And finally, brethren, let's turn over to 2 Peter 3, verses 8 through 9, where it says, But do not overlook this one fact, beloved, that with the Lord 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as 1 day. The Lord is not slow to fulfill His promise, as some count slowness, but is patient toward you, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance. So let's redeem that time and recover that wasted time and put it to use in ways that are pleasing to our Father in heaven. And with that, we'll bring this to a close and say shalom.